they're not just open to lease without a lot of work.
Any further discussion or arising? Just one thing I'd like to bring up that I'm pretty pleased about, and Councillor Johnson, I'm sure would like to share it, that year on year, last year to this year, we are 3,000 passengers up through the terminal. So I think that's pretty good news.
One other question: why did the committee, the Airport Authority Committee, decide to waive the exit tax at the airport?
Didn't decide to waive exit tax at the airport because we've never had exit tax at the airport. It put it on the floor as a means of for discussion whether we should perhaps look at it in the future, as a lot of airports do, $5 or something on the way out, because we're very conscious that we want our airport to be run as best it can without too much impact on the ratepayer. We discussed it and we rejected it at this stage. So we haven't rescinded anything, we just discussed it as an option. Any further discussion? Being none, all in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Moving now to the Emergency Management Committee. Again, these are unconfirmed minutes, so I would ask for a mover and a seconder.
Mr. Chairman.
I'm sorry?
Your councillors probably want to note on 7/4 there's a recommendation there as well. Number 253. That needs to be, as well as receiving the minutes, you need to be adopting the recommendation as well.
Okay, so not only we so we move to adopt the recommendation. Recommendation 253 that the 2011 Taupo Rural Fire Plan be approved by Council. Okay, so I'm asked for a mover. Mover, Councillor Kirk. Seconder, Councillor Downard. All those in favour?
Aye.
Any questions, discussions pertaining from there? Okay, well we've still got time before the agenda item number 12 at 2:15, so we'll move straight away to item 8. Miss Joanne Lewis is here and wishes to speak to this resolution. There's two things I'd like to point out to my councillors. The conclusion and the suggested resolution cannot be dealt with in open council today, because proceedings could be appealed, etc., and sub judice and what have you. We will make a resolution in the confidential section when we move into confidence later on this afternoon. So in the meantime, we'll take a presentation from Miss Joanne Lewis. Hello, Miss Lewis, and as I say, you can feel free to ask questions at the end, but the resolution will come in the confidential section later.
So this is an objection that has been made. So both myself and Mr. Patel will address you. So firstly, I just want to ensure that you have not just the agenda item that relates to this, but also the attachment, which is a copy of the objection. So by way of introduction, my name's Joanne Lewis. I know some of you, but not all of you. I'm a resource management consultant based here in Taupo, and I've been assisting Mr. Patel, who's to my left here, with an application to establish a soubrette on a site in Pihanga Street. So what we're going to do is I'm going to just speak to the objection that we've lodged and just take you through the main points of that, and refer briefly to the staff report that you have on your agenda. And then Mr. Patel has a statement that he has written that gives you some context around the cost issue on this resource consent application. So firstly, as I've mentioned, Mr. Patel's company, in fact Saga Enterprises Limited, applied to Taupo District Council to establish a soubrette on a small site behind what we know as the Spa Road shops, but on Pihanga Street. And the application was notified publicly, and there was a hearing in front of two independent commissioners and Councillor Crate in June, from which a decision was issued to grant consent to the soubrette proposal. Now, under the Resource Management Act, Council is entitled to recover the actual and reasonable costs of the consent process from an applicant, and not unexpectedly, therefore, in July this year, we received an invoice from Council for the cost of processing the application, and in total it's an invoice for $28,557 and some cents, plus, and that included, GST. So on the first page of the objection letter, I've just provided a breakdown of the components of that invoice, and attached to our letter is a copy of that invoice. So the main components were the planning consent processing costs, which is your council staff costs, your admin staff and your planning staff in terms of processing the application, providing evidence to the hearing, etc. And looking down the list, the other substantial cost is the cost for the hearing panel, and in this case, as I mentioned, there were some independent hearings commissioners involved as well. So it's only two of those cost components that we're formally objecting to, and the first is the planning consent processing fee, which is some $9,500, plus the public notice cost. That's the cost of the public advertisement, if you like, in the newspapers. So turning briefly to those, the first one, which is explained on the top of the second page of my letter, relates to the costs of council sending out copies of their report to some 70 objectors or submitters. There were about half and half objections and those in support, but the Resource Management Act sets down the process for this, and the Act clearly says that council is to only send out a copy of the report to the parties who have indicated that they wish to be heard. And so we don't feel that the cost of that should be one that council recoups from the applicant, because in this case there was only in fact one, and there ended up being about 3 or 4 that actually wished to be heard. So that's the reason for objecting to that cost. And in the council staff agenda item, you'll see that they have agreed to that. They've accepted that yes, the Act doesn't actually require them to send out that report more widely. So they have agreed, and we acknowledge that, they've agreed that cost should be deducted from the account. Secondly, in terms of that planning processing cost, is the cost of council staff involvement at the hearing. Now in this case, or in every case, when there's a hearing, a council officer will prepare planning evidence, and that's usually a fairly lengthy and extensive report. And in this case, there was an appropriately extensive report prepared by Ms. Kendall Good, and that was the report that was provided by council staff in evidence to the hearings panel at the hearing. Also in attendance at the hearing was Ms. Good's senior planner, Ms. Wallace, and half of the cost of Ms. Wallace's attendance has been included in the account that the applicant, Mr. Patel's company, is being required to meet. It's our view that it's only the cost of one planner that an applicant should be required to meet. At the hearing, in fact, the solicitor who is taking Mr. Patel's case specifically asked the chairman about the role that Ms. Wallace was filling at the hearing, and we were advised that it was one of a mentoring role. Now I see from your staff report that that's not the way that they saw the role, and certainly at the hearing there were 2 or 3 questions. Councillor Craig might have a better memory than I, but there were certainly 2 or 3 questions where the hearings panel put questions to Ms. Good, and she turned in and asked Ms. Wallace to respond. And it's entirely appropriate, I should say, that that junior staff have the experience of providing evidence at hearings, but I'd just suggest that it's not an applicant's role to be funding that mentoring or professional development support. So those are the reasons why in our submission today we believe the costs of Ms Wallace's attendance shouldn't be one that an applicant is being expected to meet. Thirdly is the cost of the public notice in the paper, and in my letter to you I've included a quote from the Resource Management Act, where it specifically says that a public notice means a notice published in a newspaper circulating in the entire area likely to be affected by the proposal to which the notice relates. Now, in this case, a notice was placed in the Taupo Times, which we say is completely appropriate, but also in the New Zealand Herald at a cost of around about $1,400 or $1,500. And in our view, the Act is quite clear that it need only be placed in one paper. And again, if council staff are of the view that they wish to circulate it more widely, then I don't have a difficulty with that. But I certainly don't think that an applicant should be funding public notification any wider than what the Act sets down. So that's the reason why we request that the cost of the public notice in the New Zealand Herald should be likewise deducted from the account. I noticed that in your staff report to your agenda today that they also agree that the New Zealand Herald costs should be deducted from the account, but the reason, and I acknowledge that, but I would say that the reason why it should be deducted is simply because the Act says a newspaper circulating in the area, not because in this case there aren't property owners who are absentee. If an application affects an area where there are lots of absentee owners, then as part of the notification process, the council is obliged to send out letters to anyone that it thinks may be adversely affected, and it's through that method that I'd suggest to you that any absentee owners should be made aware of an application, not by putting public notices in the New Zealand Herald or the Dominion for that matter. So those are the issues that we have in relation to the costs, and that's formally what we have asked in terms of the relief that we're seeking. Mr Patel has some wider issues in terms of the costs of the resource consent process, and he's going to go through that with you. Do you want councillors to put any questions?
Ms Lewis, firstly, this agenda item, you've spoken to it. You say he's got wider issues. They're not agendaed here for today.
So what I'm explaining to you, this is a hearing of an objection, so we are, in that light, able to provide you with evidence in support of our objection. And so whilst I've given you some evidence, verbal, Mr Patel is also providing a statement.
Or is Mr Patel asking for more than what you've asked for here, which is $1,900 or something?
Mr Patel provides some contextual comments in relation to the reduction we're seeking here. He also has some other comments which are not lengthy, which relate to the cost issue.
Well, I'm mindful of time. We'll hear Mr Patel and then I'll ask the councillors if they have any question. As I said before, I will be reading out a resolution at the end of this. The decision will go into the confidence section this afternoon, because I'm sure you understand with court proceedings, etc. That's the